and welcome back. It's Wednesday. Do you know what that means, my dudes? That's right, it's... The response to me vlogging myself getting back into this hobby has been really positive, like overwhelmingly positive, and I'm thankful for that. So everyone who's tuning in, watching the videos, liking the videos, commenting, subscribing, all that good shit, thank you. Normally in these videos I'm going to have a section where I hold myself accountable and show what I've been doing with my hobby in terms of painting, gluing, modelling or playing. I was going to record some b-roll and show you my Sanguinary Guard that I finished last weekend, but this video's going to be long enough as it is, so if you want to check that stuff out, check out my Instagram, link in the description below. Look about integration, cross-integration across platforms, fuck yeah! I also played my first game of Warhammer 40k at all in 8th edition on a tabletop simulator. Again, I post about this on Twitter a little bit and on Instagram. A lot of fun. I lost, but only marginally, and hopefully I'll be playing some more of that this week as well. With that out of the way, I want to get to the crux of the matter for this week's episode of Warhammer Wednesday, where I'm going to talk about the basic lore of Warhammer. I'm going to give a very brief summary of the setting, and then talk about each of the factions very briefly. So this is a scrubs guide, a newbie's guide to the lore of Warhammer 40k, through the lens of someone who is basically remembering all this stuff from like several decades ago, with some cursory glances at some wikis to make sure I know what the fuck I'm talking about. I'm not making too many mistakes. Or maybe I won't look at any wikis, because mistakes breed interaction. And you know what interaction means, right? It's a synonym for engagement. Right, let's get to that fluffy lore talk about factions. But before factions comes context. It is the 41st or perhaps 42nd millennium. This seems to be a contrasting thing I see written in different sources. Something that confused me quite a bit actually. As a kid, I didn't realise that millennium meant 1,000 years. Because the game says 40,000, right? And as a kid I was like, millennium? Isn't that a million years? But no. For those of you who don't know, a millennium is 1,000 years. Sounds obvious when you say it out loud now, but a young child like me had no fucking idea. So approximately 38,000 years from now, mankind has expanded across the known galaxy, spanning countless worlds. Our population is uncountable. We're big, we're huge, like some kind of fungal infection. We're guided on this quest by a decaying corpse squatting on a golden toilet, shitting vitriolic, overzealous fanaticism into the cosmos in some vain attempt to stay alive in a universe so hostile to the idea of a good time, it probably wouldn't even crack a smile at a good cum joke. Let's give it a shot, shall we? Let's give it a shot. How can you tell you have a very high sperm count? Well, when your partner has to chew before swallowing. See? Fucking miserable. So this God Emperor corpse thing basically was the Emperor of mankind, and it died in some drama about 10,000 years ago. It was once a talky, walky, godly big boy, but it now just sits on this throne and guides humanity's spaceships through the universe, and it requires approximately 10,000 people sacrificed to it daily, psychics sacrificed to it daily, for it to work. The reason we need this guide is that to travel the cosmos, you have to go through a thing called the warp. The warp is 50% an approximation of the risks that sea travel had on early merchant and exploration vessels as we began to venture beyond our own lands in human history to be absolute bastards everywhere but our homelands. Kind of similar to how you have to research seafaring in Civilization 2 in order to not get your ships lost at sea when travelling. The other half of the warp's inspiration, well, it's about 50% approximation of basically travelling through literal hell. The warp being a dangerous, writhing, extraplanar void filled with demons and psychic hazards that even Uri Geller wouldn't shake a spoon at. And this brings me to my major point about all this context and the setting. The warp is a great example of the rich, intercontextual tapestry that is 40k. I think this is why the lore is so unique and also so compelling to many nerds. It looks to appropriate and remold tropes and iconography of many sources into something truly unique, from real-world history to fantasy fiction, and of course science fiction as well. The warp is one of the most literal renditions of hazards of space travel. Many science fiction franchises present space as cold, or dangerous, or hostile, but 40k goes one step further by putting out a map and saying, there be monsters here. Literal fucking monsters. And then we have the fantasy influence too. The warp is where literal gods are birthed and live. It's hell by any other name. It has demons just like writhing around, just looking to fuck your skull. And honestly, all that's pretty cool. Not the skull fucking, but like all the other stuff I just said. To further illustrate this point, I want you to understand what I mean by grimdark. It's a term used to describe 40k all the time. Warhammer's tagline is kind of where the term came from. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. This is a mission statement that tells us that this isn't the utopian ideal that we see in some science fiction, like Star Trek, for example. This is a hellish, nightmare-fueled depiction of the future. It's bleak and nihilistic and unforgiving, arguably so much so that it's just not to some people's tastes. But the approach is rather earnest, and Games Workshop are committed to it. There might be a thin veneer of irony to Warhammer's blatant absurdity, but it's often played very straight in terms of its presentation and tone. Give a little bit more clarity here to like grimdark. I was looking around for like explanations of it, and in this review of a book that I haven't read and probably won't ever read, Liz Burke said this: "It is that grim darkness that gives me complicated feelings. Grimdark is a shorthand in modern fantasy literature for a subgenre that values its gritty realism, that attempts to overturn long-established heroic tropes. As much a locus for the critical and definitional argument as anything else, for me its defining characteristic lies in a retreat into the valorization of darkness for darkness' sake, into a kind of nihilism that portrays right action in terms of personal morality as either impossible or futile." Whilst other things being described as grimdark seem to really like their realism, like people talk about how dark and grim and gritty like Game of Thrones is for being a fantasy story which is like realistic, Warhammer doesn't do that. It kind of embeds itself in, like I said, fantasy tropes and medieval, middle-aged sort of iconography in order to tell its stories. There's an element of realism there in terms of its historical reference points, but beyond that, the whole nihilistic idea that no one is in the right and doing the right thing is kind of futile, well, that's at the core of what 40k is about. It encapsulates something that we all need to understand going into 40k. Everyone, and I mean everyone, by product of being in this incredibly unforgiving and hostile environment that is this fictional universe, is a massive, massive bastard. And on that note, let's talk about the Space Marines. Oh, hold up. Before we do, the last little bit of context. Oh, I know you like it, you filthy little context whore. The teams, or armies, or factions of 40k have allegiances, and are part of a side. Forces of man, in which there are multiple playable armies, although they can fight each other as well, because there's a lot of infighting in this universe, all fall under the banner of the Imperium, or the Imperium of Man. Then you have the naughty humans, the ones that fell to the dark gods. Think of it like light side versus dark side in Star Wars, except it's not possible to argue that both sides aren't just massive cunts. The naughty humans are the forces of chaos. Again, multiple armies within it, multiple books, but they can all be aligned if you want. I'll talk about more of that in a moment. Then you have the third category, which is the Xenos, the alien, the non-human. They aren't a large faction in and of themselves that can combine. I mean, there's allyship rules somewhere, I think, but on the whole, these fight separately. These are the forces of Eldar, the Orks, the Tyranids, the Tau, the Necrons. Anyway, onwards, starting with the humans. So humans, firstly you have the Imperial Guard, or Astra Militarum for their fancier in-universe name. These are the Starship Troopers, shock troops and your average blokes in basic armour, carrying the most easily produced weaponry in the Imperium that can be mass reproduced. What they lack in physical strength and ability, and also equipment, they make up for in numbers and, I guess, tanks too. They are the closest you'll get to a horde army in amongst the humans. From an aesthetic perspective, they are some of the most down-to-earth modern military grittiness you will find in the game. They have a visual style that ranges somewhere from like the Marines and Aliens to a combination of World War I and World War II iconography, including some fashy shit, right through to the Catachan, which are muscle-bound sweat horses that would not look out of place as the protagonists of their own Contra game in another universe where they're actually remarkable. Not this one though, no one's remarkable. We're all gonna die. These are your average lads and lasses hanging on for dear life, normally waiting for the Space Marines to show up according to law. They also have a solid selection of tanks and armour, which you can field like entire mechanised divisions with very few actual human troops in, so you can have big old cannons on tracks and gun lines if that's what gets you moist. Next up within the Imperium of Man, we have the one that everyone knows, the Adeptus Astartes, or Astartes, I'm not even sure exactly how you pronounce it, the Space Marines. This is Warhammer's Mickey Mouse or Ronald McDonald, the poster boys of the franchise. These are in canon hulking super soldiers who undergo decades of gene therapy, growth hormone manipulation, and training to become Astartes, some of the hardest bastards in the universe. The funny thing is that in spite of their poster boy plot armour and being the most expansive model line with constant updates and love from the parent company, your average Marine just isn't as double-yard as the lore and surrounding fluff might make you believe. When playing with them, you will see on tabletop often that the mighty Emperor's Chosen, one of your angels of death, get gunned down by groups of shitty infantry with crap guns. And then you also have the fact that they keep on creeping the absurdity of both lore and mechanics to dwarf the power level of your average Marine with bigger and badder badasses. But more of that on a moment. The Marines are plentiful in number, but dwarfed by the sheer number of the loyal average Imperial Guardsmen. Space Marines belong to what are called chapters. They're descended from the Emperor's 20 genetically modified children called Primarchs. They all carry a bit of the Primarch inside them, called Gene Seed. Think of it like a really super powerful boiled egg that helps you grow big and strong. But instead of a bit of protein to grow big and strong, it's like allows you to fist concrete, spit acid, and you're 8 foot tall and shit. These chapters are all color coded and could do with an entire video of their own where I loosely recall what makes them all so unique and glance at a wiki from time to time. Some of these chapters are long gone. They're lost to the warp, the lures of chaos. But the ones that stuck around, well, you have some pretty famous ones. You have the Space Smurfs, the Edgy Boys, the Angry Boys, and what I like to call the Banana Fisty Men. There are said to be over 1,000 chapters, including successor chapters that have come from the larger chapters. And they all fill their own fleets, armies, distinct quirks, colour schemes, all that jazz. You can even make up your own if you want to make, fluff the shit out of it. That's one of the beauties of Warhammer, is that people talk about their own homegrown lore and stuff. It's one part war game, but it's one part RPG in that respect. Quite importantly though, there are no, at present, female Space Marines because, and I quote, girls are icky. But don't worry, we have the next best thing. For fans of films like Sister Act and Leather, we have the Murder Nuns. Complete with cathedrals on wheels and a group of mechanically altered self-flagellating sitters, the Sisters of Battle wear power armor much like a Space Marine. They shoot similar weapons like Space Marines, and they defend the Emperor like Space Marines. But no, they aren't Space Marines. Well, they don't have the Easter egg filled with the semen of your great-great-grandfather inserted inside you, so thusly they don't have rather normal human physiology compared to the super men of the Space Marines. What isn't normal about them is their fanaticism. The Sisters of Battle are essentially the literal armed forces of a fanatical church of the Emperor. The Adeptus Sororitas, as they're called in canon, revere the Emperor as the one true god, which is ironic because not only was the Emperor a bit of an incel that didn't want to let women into his super manly man gang, but he also kind of hated religion, just like your average woman-fearing centrist atheist writing skeptic videos on the internet. There are some blokes wearing Pope hats in the army, and I'm not quite sure where they fit in, honestly, I didn't look it up, or there's some of them being tortured for heresy in amongst their units where they've been altered just to be cannon fodder, but mostly they're out there being incredibly cool looking and fucking people up in a similar fashion to the Marines, just with less super strength and more leather. They're one of the most recently updated model lines, hence why all their stuff just looks fantastic and so much cooler and well made than most other models you might see in this video. They have a visual aesthetic steeped in much of the same audacious fantasy and middle-aged themes iconography of the Marines, but it's just kind of slicker and a little bit, I don't want to say cooler, but it kind of is. Next up we have Warhammer's answer to Jawa's, the Adeptus Mechanicus. These red-clad roby boys are the tech cults of Mars and other similar Forge worlds, I think. A literal cult of the machine who worship the machine god, which means they actually got to keep their own religion whilst being folded into the ranks of humanity, which might give you an idea of just how much they are respected or perhaps feared by the rest of the Imperium, because they didn't have their own religion, stamped out as heresy. Most of them are more robot than human anymore these days. They give us the most probably transhumanistic faction in the entire game, way more so than the Marines, with an aesthetic that pulls on elements of pulp sci-fi, with robots that wouldn't look out of place in 1950s comic book covers or movie posters, and units that fly on webbed cobbled wings. They have units whose legs and arms have been replaced with tank tracks and guns. Think General Grievous but in a flasher-mac and much more militarised. Then we come to the Custodes, who are the Emperor's protectors. Sponge bathing down his aging skeletal remains and periodically checking his bedpan for a holy relic, if you know what I mean. That was a joke about demigod poop. Please laugh. Please. They are also super Space Marines. So I mentioned that your average super soldier starts to feel less super in a galaxy filled with even more supers? Well, yeah, the golden clad Custodes, they're the elite bodyguard of the Emperor's Palace, 9 foot tall, genetically engineered, and clad in the most fantastical nonsense armour in the universe. Like I said, parallels to medieval knights and stupidly ornate visuals are everywhere in this canon. As an army, they're so elite that they field very few actual models on tabletop. Every model they field is 2 or 3 Marines, or even an entire squad of lesser mortal units. They are the elite of the elite, which makes other elites seem kind of less elite by comparison. As sardonic as I sound, these might be my next pickup, a small Imperial Custodes attachment to support my Blood Angels in battle. Then lastly, we have the forces of man that aren't quite entire armies and can't be fielded as armies themselves, but as part of other armies. More so individuals that accompany Imperial forces. We have the Inquisition, and we have the Assassins. The Inquisition look to seek out mutants, heresy, and chaos wherever they can amongst the Imperium and cleanse it. They are scary motherfuckers that even the Space Marines eye with suspicion because when an Inquisitor shows up, it means the Marines themselves might be under scrutiny for heresy or chaotic influence. And of course, the Imperium of Man loves a good jerk-off session to see who is more chaste and devout the Imperial truths of the God Emperor. The assassins are these sick-looking models that go in and murder individual problem targets. The exact difference between an assassin and the Inquisitors in terms of lore isn't really clear to a noob like me. I think the assassins are more edgy-looking than ecclesiastical one-man armies sent to kill rather than investigate. Also, as a kid, I always wanted one of these, which now, decades later, reminds me of the Crisis suits. Maximum edginess engaged. There are also the Night Houses, which are basically Space Marine chapters, but instead of men, they have huge robots that take up entire armies worth of resources both on and off the table. These are the midlife crisis of Warhammer miniatures, serving to allow nerds across the land to overcompensate for never getting on the football team at school. That means I should probably buy one, honestly. Right, on to Chaos. The Chaos Gods are manifestations of emotion, birthed from within the warp as a culmination of the wants, desires and passions of the occupants of this galaxy. More on that a little later with a case study of sorts. These gods, Nurgle, Slaanesh, Tassich, is that how I pronounce that? And Khorne, well, the last of which should not be confused with the shitty new metal band, these are the Chaos Gods. The Force of Chaos, the gods they serve, again, could be their own wiki reciting video, so bear with me while I kind of synopsize everything for everyone. In short, 10,000 years ago, around the turn of the 31st millennium, see, I used the word there, the Emperor was betrayed by a few of his little gene babies. Chief among them was Horus. Horus and his ilk fell to the dark side, as it were, and their legions become the traitor legions, the heretic Astartes. These spunky little renegades, rebels without a cause, I guess they had a cause, that doesn't work, are the evil, naughty Marines, with some spiky bits, and an excuse to put tons of gore on your model bases. A lot more violent, dark, and possibly even grimmer than their devoted good boy Astartes counterparts, the Forces of Chaos employ a lot of similar war gear, weapons, and vehicles. At one point or another, I guess you could have argued they were just palette-swapped Marines with less new models and less rule support. Things seem to have come a long way in terms of giving them unique and interesting sub-factions with their own models and unique rules. For example, in the same way that the Space Marines have different chapters with different codices, we have the Death Guard. These are a chapter or sub-faction that is all about plague, pus, pestilence, and plasticine? Okay, not the last one, but I was digging for another plosive to add to those puzz. But the others do stand true. They are all degradation and decay, and their models look incredible for it. The Great Unclean one, for example, is Big Papa Nurgle's big old manifestation boy. Technically a demon, I think, which is probably my favourite model in the modern game, and I really want to get one to paint one day. Maybe I will, maybe I won't, who knows. Then you have the Thousand Sons, who are the most magical of the Chaos Legions. They're really leaning into the whole Psyker thing. Most armies have Psykers, but even their base troops are led by aspiring sorcerers. Climbing the corporate ladder of psychic-induced murder sprees is an unforgiving career trajectory, or so I fear. And then we have the literal fucking demons. Models that can, as far as I know, also be fielded in Warhammer Age of Sigmar, the fantasy version of this game, so you can double up. These aeon-spanning spawns of fictional satans are a varied collection of demon princes, monstrosities, slugs, and other such fun goodness. All of which can be their own monstrous army, or a separate detachment, or allied force with Chaos Space Marines, so you get a bit of shootiness and a bit of demonness all at the same time. Of course there are Chaos Knights, which is a good example of anything you could do. I can do Spikier from the Agents of Chaos themselves. Big, hulking robots designed as both penis extensions and craft projects for an aspiring nerd, which is nice. Okay, it's alien time now. Let's talk about the Eldar. Once upon a time called Eldar, they're now called the Eldari, and other names that I am struggling to come to terms with. These are your space elves. All Eldar used to be part of a galaxy-spanning empire of technological marvels and untold psychic empowerment and progress. Then they got a little carried away, and then their overindulgent, passion-filled, we're great, let's enjoy ourselves parties, also known to your average person and your parents as an orgy, they accidentally fucked a god into existence. That's right, in search of new experiences and pleasures and delights of the flesh, the Eldar accidentally manifested the youngest of the Chaos Gods, Slaanesh. Their depravity birthed a literal hell monster god, the silly twats. This was their downfall, the Empire fell, and now they travel around on planet-sized ships called craft worlds, trying to reclaim their former glory. Well, that's the High Elf equivalents, the craft world faction. They're looking to conserve their numbers, using bone-weaving magic, also known as psychic powers, and soul crystals to conserve the minds of their dead and bolster their numbers even when people fall in battle. They have tooled conehead helmets that are similar to, well, coneheads, a far more slender design than the Marines because they're drawing on the iconography and the schemes that we know exist in fantasy fiction for elves, like in Warhammer Fantasy, for example. They have sick warrior clans that often have very distinct colour schemes to the rest of their armies and stand out from them, and they have hover tanks that back in my day, when we walked uphill to school both ways, were unique. But now even Marines have those, so fuck Eldar, I guess. Then there are what are called Dark Eldar, the Drukhari, who are quicker to embrace the old murderous fuck clown persona of the Elder Demon Prince their ancestors felched into existence. They're in and out quicker than a professional hokey-cokey champion. They are a raiding party collection of sadist murder pirates. They like to wear the ears of their victims and capture people to tweak their nipples and slap their bums and spit in their cracks or something. There is a third faction, which I'm not so familiar with, called Harlequins. They're less murderous torture masters, but more clown than the Drukhari brethren. They serve the laughing god and travel in groups called masks to illustrate how performative they are. They dance through combat and are notoriously pain in the arse army to paint for a beginner because, well, due to a lot of checkered patterns that would make even Paris Fashion Week blush. They are the drama students of the Eldar forces, except for one important difference. They're actually useful and serve a purpose. Bugs. Tyranids were a favourite of mine as a kid. Think Starship Troopers bugs with the minor elements of reptilian and the xenomorph designs from Alien. They are essentially the Zerg, and served as an inspiration to them. I think StarCraft, as far as accounts go, was going to be a Warhammer game back in the day, and then it fell through. They are a swarm-like race of bioweapons that can field huge squads of violent smaller creatures, or field monstrous huge bioweapons like Carnifexes up to Hierophants. These hive fleets swarm through the galaxy looking to consume and feed upon all biological matter where possible in a brutal force that is, beyond human comprehension. This is just a biological animal that you can't really reason with. They're a secondary backup faction called the Gene Stealer Cult, which is where biological matter from the Tyranid fleet makes it into a world's populace, infects them, warping them, and mutating them over several generations to become loyal to the godlike figure, the Four-Armed Emperor, which is basically just manipulation. They then form a very guerrilla warfare style militia, complete with dirt bikes and mining drills to allow them to fight and damage the defense of the planet on which they are, and the Tyranids eventually show up and eat everyone. Yeah, fuck them. At the core of both of those armies is the idea of the Gene Stealer, which is one of the base troops of Tyranids. They're probably one of the most famous visuals of this faction and the game in general. They're Warhammer's unrelenting alien menace, hunting down its prey, one individual unit being, incredibly dangerous. Very similar and reminiscent to the xenomorphs of Alien, they were seen in Space Hulk, where you played a board game where you fought basically xenomorphs versus the human faction, the Marines. But there is one other rather iconic alien race that battles with the Gene Stealer for the limelight of what everyone associates with Warhammer. That's the Warg. Warg being the term used to describe a collection of orcs.
Out of here with that sparkly thing. I'm Boss Grimskull! This whole planet is mine! Whoa!
That's right, kind of the plural of orcs is a warg. It's a warg of orcs, and I fucking love it. The orc are Warhammer's comic relief. They're often presented with a thick Cockney accent in the video games, using British slang, referring to their units as lads, boys and knobs and other fantastic names. They are a porting of the famous fantasy characters of orcs from Warhammer Fantasy. Nomadic and violent, they're scavengers who, whilst crudely done, often ingeniously port or convert the armour and weapons and vehicles of their enemies into sick orc conversions. They are crafty, tenacious, and have a zest for DIY ingenuity that would make even Carol Smiley impressed. They are a green-skinned horde in their numbers, and messy in their presentation. They have a bit more of a randomness to their psychic mechanics and visual aesthetic that is missing from most of the other races, and if you want to convert and chop up old models on eBay to build unique orc vehicles, there are rules to support you in that rather orc-like endeavour. Oh, and something I found out recently is that orcs in this intellectual property reproduce by growing themselves like fungus, because they are fungus. Yeah, that's some weird but cool shit. Then you have the Necrons, a race of sentient robots. Think Terminator T-800, but with a little bit of ancient Egyptian iconography thrown in. Some mysticism permeates their origins. They have been long dormant, betrayed by some elder god or long-dead spacefaring civilization. They were trapped away in tombs, much like they would expect from a fantasy undead army. Think somewhere between the long-defunct fantasy army of Tomb Kings, which is a Egyptian-themed mummies and monsters undead army, with crossed with an undead horde of skeletons, but metallic. And you have the right idea. Oh, and added the disturbingly good mix of powerful guns. The Necrons have what are called reanimation protocols and have a new unit, which is a reanimator unit. So basically they are the undead. You cut them down in their swaths, and then they may just like get back up and keep fighting, zombie or skeleton-esque. I believe this might be a great starting Xenos army for newbies. Easy to paint if you go for a simplistic approach and colour scheme, and with a shit ton of new support and new models coming next month and in the Indomitus box, they are set to be the new big bad villain of the ongoing unfolding plotline of 40k's lore. And then last but not least in the aliens is the Tau. A race that still feels like the new kids on the block to me, as their models were launching after I left the game as a kid, which is approximately 20 years ago. My understanding of these is at its absolute lowest amongst all the stuff on this list, so cut me some slack if I don't really go into much detail or have much to say about them. They have a visual aesthetic and flavour of clean, crisp and almost anime-esque Gundam proportions and styles. They have these mech suits. They are closest we have to a clean, hopeful science fiction of Star Trek in this grimdark future of ongoing and never-ending war. Again, they have hover tanks. They have these clean edges and sharp lines on their mech suits, and they have these drones that protect them by hovering around them and taking shots. So if you like mech suits and anime and guns, these will probably be your friends. Thematically, they look to work towards a greater good. They have a philosophical and moralistic framework that their society hinges upon, and it is as it sounds, that intelligent life should work towards a greater good as a combination to benefit all life, which is very bright and hopeful compared to the rest of the universe. Of course, such a concept probably doesn't work out very well when all your neighbours are massive fucking shitlords. If the Tyranids are the Zerg and the Eldar are the Protoss, I guess these are closest to being the Covenant. I believe they also work with a few other races in amongst their combine, as it were. So I guess, yeah, they're similar to the Covenant in that respect, and from an aesthetic perspective, they're kind of like that, but with sharper edge. They are known for having some of the best guns in the game, but they're not a fan of fistfights, as I understand it. And so, that's a rundown of each of the factions in Warhammer 40k. This script was way longer than I thought it would be, and this video to be way longer than I thought it would be. And I've probably missed something. When I checked my notes against the Games Workshop website, there was another name, which is the Inari. And I didn't look it up, but it turns out from the tooltip, it's bring together the Eldari for the God of the Dead. So I think that's just when you combine the three Eldar races that I just said. I'm new to this. And I hope you enjoy coming along on the vibe with me. I've been Vince, also known as PleasantKenobi on the internet. If you enjoyed this video, please let me know. Hopefully it was helpful, interesting, informative, at least amusing. If you did like it, then tell me if you want to see some more stuff like this from me about magic, for example. I don't do a lot of canon videos, but I'd happily do it. I like reading up on this stuff and then talking about it in my own way. So if that's something you want to see in future, let me know. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, drop me a comment, let me know if I missed something, or if there's something you want me to expand upon, or what you want to see more of in Warhammer Wednesdays on the channel in general. Thanks for watching. I've been Vince, also known as PleasantKenobi on the internet, and I'll see you all very, very soon. Ta-ta for now.